Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast. On today's episode, JP Oliveira, who has been on our show before, has graciously returned. JP is a psychologist who practices a mix of both psychology and spirituality in his work. And JP has just written a book called A Boy Named JP that just came out on July 1st. And we invited JP back because we felt like some of the issues he talks about in the book, autism, isolation, bullying, all of these sorts of things that happen when you're in your childhood often, and then later become traumatic events that we kind of have to look back on and repair or figure out. He talks about this in his book and offers some really great perspective and an opening for conversations. So take it away, JP. Tell us all about your new book.
First of all, the book's called A Boy Called JP, but not big deal, name called same thing. So it's pretty much a book about my childhood when I was a kid, talking about growing up in an environment where I was not only a foreigner, but I also was an outsider. And then I was also, I was gay, but, not openly because there's no way you could be openly gay in the 70s as a child. And then I got picked on a lot by kids and by teachers. And so I talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect as well that you mentioned. The educational system didn't necessarily support you either.
Well, they often talk about bystanders, like people who are sitting, you've got the victim and the perpetrator and the bystanders. So what they don't understand is that sometimes those bystanders are not just standing by and letting, witnessing it, they're letting it happen purposefully because maybe it's they are themselves wanting to pick on someone and they let the other children do the dirty job for them. But I got picked on by the teacher as well. There were several things that happened to me when I was a kid where teachers were definitely, not all teachers, some of them were really good, but some of them were definitely picking on me and being mean to me. That's kind of funny, but there was kind of for example, there's an instance when I was in third grade where you enter the classroom and then you would have the classroom, you would have the end, you would have the blackboard. And behind the blackboard, there was a room where the teacher would store all the supplies and the brooms and the cleaning products. And one day I was talking in class. I must have been 7 or 8 years old, and she asked me to go into that room, and she left me there. There was all dark, and I was left in there for like an hour and a half. And by the time the kids came out of school, she had forgotten that she had put me in that room. So when she went to get something out of there, she's like, "What are you doing here?"
Oh, she forgot you were in the room?
Yes, she left me in the back of the room, in the back of the classroom.
That's
And
crazy.
so I had another teacher, for example. I'm colorblind, and I don't know what I did. I must have I used the wrong colors, and I made and so she had those clothespins that you would hang clothes with, and she, I don't know if she stapled it or she put a clothespin. I think it was a clothespin. She put my drawing in the back of my shirt, and she had me standing for the whole entire classroom for like a half an hour with my drawing in the back of my shirt because she felt that what I had done was so ugly that it deserved for other people to make fun of me.
I'm curious, did she do that because she also felt like you had not followed the directions, and so as some kind of punishment to the other kids?
I was 7 years old or 8 years old.
I know, I understand.
And so I don't know that I understood, most children that age, they don't know, a lot of the time they don't understand directions. So I don't know if that was because I don't think that she was purposefully mean. I think she had a weird way of being. I don't think she was a mean-spirited human being. She was just tone deaf, and I think that for me as a kid, I thought that's really, really messed up what she's doing. That the more as I grew up, I realized that people did what they did to kids because they could do it. They could get away with murder. Like I had teachers. I had a teacher in fourth or fifth grade. Was fourth grade or fifth grade? I can't remember. Who basically beat the crap out of the students every day. He would beat him up, beat him up, beat him up. That kid was a contrarian. He would never follow directions, so he would grab him one day. He grabbed him by the hair and kicked him while he was holding him by the head and the hair. And he's doing that in front of the whole entire classroom. And I went home and I told my parents, I'm like, teacher was really beating the crap out of this boy, and this kid is difficult. That was what my parents responded. There was a tolerance for violence that was, so when you have the director of the school, the guy was the director of the school, when you have the director of the school beating the shit out of a kid in front of the other students, kicking and punching and slapping him and pulling and doing all whatever he felt like doing, if the director does that in front of students, what do you think he's modeling? What do you think the behavior that's he's saying? Well, that's okay. You know that's violence is a perfectly acceptable mode of communication. You have the right to beat the crap out. And in the U.S., I worked in schools for a long time, and most teachers found violence in the U.S. because now people, the pendulum swung the other way around. Like it went from being overly punitive to being overly permissive. And now some kids abuse the rules, and now you can't even say or do anything. I've seen the other side, but there are some teachers who are pushed to their limits in the educational system in the U.S. Not that it's okay for them to put their hands on kids, but I understand why, because we tend to treat children like beyond just kids. Like we're like, oh, they're not responsible for their action. They're not responsible for their action. They are not responsible for their action. And then one day, the magical age happened, and then suddenly they get trialed like an adult and sent to jail. So a society is condoning bad behavior to the point where there's no expectation being set to good behavior. But then the thing is, I'm going to bring it back to my book. When I was a kid, the other kids could pick up within 5 minutes that I was neurodivergent. They could pick up within 5 minutes that something was up about me around my identity and the way I presented myself and who I was as a kid. And so they hated me for it, and they picked on me. And they picked on me in front of teachers, they picked on me away from teachers. And sometimes I would go to teachers, like ask them for help, like I'd look at them and I'd talk to them, and they didn't do anything to help me.
It's really interesting.
There was one particular incident where this group of kids wanted to beat me up. During the school day, they wanted to beat me up. And I was maybe 8 years old. And I went to the teacher that was, the teacher's monitoring the courtyard. And I said, you need to help me. They want to hurt me. And she's like looking at me like, there's nothing I can do. So I went to the gate of the school, opened up the gate, and I ran out of the school and I left. And she's screaming at me to come back. She's telling me, you're going to be in trouble. I'm like, 2 minutes ago, I'm asking you to protect me from that group of kids, and you won't do anything. But then you're telling me I'm going to be in trouble because I'm running away from getting beat up. So I ran away, and they called the police. But I made it home for.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, I never went back to school, and I made it home by lunchtime, and my mom took me back to school in the afternoon. And then the teacher was telling my mom that I had a mental problem and I needed help. Well,
interesting.
Yeah, I needed help to run faster from the school because they were all crazy. They wanted to beat me up.
Okay, so I want to mention also, or tell us that your upbringing was a little bit different than most Americans. You grew up primarily in France and Portugal, is that correct?
I grew up in France, and I would go to Portugal during the summer. And I grew up in France, not far from Lyon, Grenoble. If you went the other side, you would have Switzerland, and to the other side, you would have Italy. And very diverse. France is a very diverse country with a lot of people from all over the world.
Yes.
All over Europe and North Africa. And so I remember being really young and telling my parents, going, when are we leaving this place? Because I didn't like living in France at all. And,
interesting.
I like French people up to a point, and I like the French culture, but I don't identify with the culture as much. It's maybe I don't identify with it because it was a place where I got hurt a lot as a kid, and nobody likes to be in a place where get hurt and everybody find it okay to hurt you.
Exactly. And then high school was primarily in Portugal, is that right?
No, high school was in the U.S.
Oh, high school is in the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, at the end of I finished my high school in the U.S.
So tell us about how that differed for you as a child and understanding bullying and being gay and, sort of dealing with societal stuff and then of course you're moving to the U.S. from France, which is different. But tell us how that experience sort of molded you, or what your perception of all of this, how this was different for you.
First of all, to anybody who says you choose to be gay, I want to say that I don't know anyone that's ever chosen to be anything. Like, you are what you are. But I can tell you that for the greatest part of my life, I basically fought to not be gay. I didn't want to be gay. I didn't want to like boys. I didn't want to be attracted to men. I didn't want that. I wanted to be like everyone else. I wanted to be, quote unquote, and I hate to use that term, normal, because I was told it's abnormal to be gay. And so I was wanting to be straight my whole entire life until the time where I decided that loving myself was more important than hating myself to be liked by others.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you deny yourself the right to be yourself, to meet other people's expectation, essentially nobody's happy. You're a fraud to other people and you're a fraud to yourself. And the worst thing of it all is that your self-hatred is easily palpable by other people. They can feel it. And
Oh.
so, you know what? They don't like you. People didn't like me for the person that I pretended to be. They didn't like me for the person I projected myself to be. They did not like me at all. And in one way, I don't blame them, but in another way, they were responsible. We live in a society. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I grew up in a society where making a gay joke was perfectly acceptable. Not that there's anything wrong with humor, but
Mm-hmm.
people would be openly, homophobic. And
Mm-hmm.
now we've gotten to a place where we cannot say anything without, the cancel police coming after you. So it's the pendulum again swung
It's
back
true.
the other way. So sometimes I think you should be able to make fun, but it's got to be done in a way which does not dehumanize the individual. So if you make a joke and you make a joke tongue in cheek and you're just being sassy, whatever, and that's all good. The problem is those jokes were really aiming at killing the soul of those people and making them
Mm.
look like they were freaks of natures, abnormal, bizarros, And so when you grow up, the last thing you want to be is the pervert next door. You don't want to be viewed as somebody who is a psycho or a pervert. You don't want to be viewed as a sexual deviant. You don't want to be viewed as somebody who needs mental. I mean, until what was it, 1977, being a homosexual was in the DSM as a mental illness, part of the paraphilic disorders. Yes,
Until when?
1977, I believe.
Wow. I didn't know that.
I gotta look it up, but it was in the 70s. They removed it.
Hmm.
So, they can you imagine your sexual being heterosexual be viewed as a mental health diagnosis? You can't help to
That would
be
be
what you
awfully
are.
confusing.
Well, I think it's awfully confusing for some people who think that being gay is a mental disease or that you're going to hell, but that's what they believe. So you're a child. In my case, I was a child. I was 7 or 8 years old. And I remember I talk about it in my book. I talk about when I first became aware of HIV AIDS. I was maybe 8 or 9
Uh-huh.
years old.
Right.
My mom used to get this magazine, and it was a weekly magazine that they had different articles. And this one Saturday morning, it came, and there was this picture of this really handsome young man on the cover. And then when you went back to the article, it showed you the before and after picture with
Mm-hmm.
before HIV/AIDS and after
Mm-hmm.
HIV/AIDS, and I was horrified.
Mm.
I was horrified. I was thinking to the back of my head, I was thinking, this is what happens when you're gay. This is what happens.
Because he looked so wasted, because his body had
He had he
wasted.
had lesions all over his face and his arms
Mm-hmm.
and his body. He had lesions everywhere, and he was skinny and he was dying. He went from being a handsome young man to looking like somebody who was, you know, it's almost like every single disease out there was ravaging his body at once. He looked like an
Mm-hmm.
open wound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
I
I
know people
remember
forget that.
I was 8 or 9, and I was pretty clever when it came to reading and understanding things. So I read the article, and I read it again, and I read it again, and I read it again, and I was like, deep down, I knew I like boys, but I didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
admit to myself. And then I thought, is that what my future is gonna be like? This is what's gonna
Mm.
happen to me if I'm gay. So that was number one. Like I was when I was 10 years old. I was 10 or 11 years old. My mom had bought The House of Spirit by Isabel Allende, which is a massive, massive book. The
Do
House
you
of
know this
Spirit.
book, Lexi? House of Spirit?
Yeah, Isabel Allende. It's House of Spirits. It's they made a movie, a very bad movie in Hollywood with
Oh.
Glenn Close and
Of course.
Antonio Banderas, I think. But the
Ah,
point
oh.
it's like it's uh, La Casa de los Espíritus, and I read it. It was like 500 pages, maybe more. And
Mm-hmm.
I used to drag that book around school with me because I would read it every time I would have a break. I would read it. It was a gigantic book. It was gigantic. It was like bigger than the Bible. The kids used to make fun of me. They used to call me Mr. Dictionary. They did. And then
Right.
when Magnum PI became popular, they started
But
calling me Higgins.
why was the
But
House of Spirits important to you, by the way?
because I was going to make the connection. The House of Spirit was a book about magic realism, like
Uh-huh.
when you have magic in the world. and
Mm-hmm.
when you can dream things and make things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that book and I was thinking, first of all, I didn't want to be gay. I didn't want to be gay. I didn't want to be gay because I didn't want to be gay like people viewed gays. I didn't want to be one of those men who dies in a hospital bed, wastes away. I didn't want to be viewed as a pervert. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be rejected. But when I read that book, The House of Spirits, in that book, crazy things happen, like magical things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all, it's like water for chocolate, where she
Mm-hmm.
cooks and she cries, and then everybody cries at the wedding because she cried into the preparation of the food. So those kind of elements. And I thought to myself, maybe I can wish my life away. Maybe I can decide I'm going to make my life what I want it to be. I can look at my life and I can project it. And so I said to myself, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be an American and I'm going to live in the US and I'm going to go live in the US and I'm going to rebuild my life. And I remember telling a teacher, she's like, what do you want to be when you get older? And I'm like, I'm going to be an American. She goes, that's ridiculous. That's not a job. And I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be a job. It is what I want to be. So I'm going to be an American. So and she was pissed. She was like, I'm going to tell your father and mother. And so she told my dad, she's like, your son wants to be an American. My father says, my son can be whatever he wants to be. What's your problem? But I was a child. I used to tell my mom, I was maybe 6, 7, 8 years old. I said, I'm going to go live in the US. I'm going to go home to the US because that's where I belong. I don't belong here. I got to leave
Oh,
this
interesting.
place. And I left and I went to the US. But the idea was to go someplace where I was really dumb at the time, to go someplace where people are more accepting and more open. And we all know
Mm-hmm.
how open and accepting people are in the US. There's some places where they welcome you with a shotgun. So it's kind of like, it's
And
kind
you
of
live in,
like,
well, I'd say you
yeah,
live in
well,
Texas,
there's
but
nothing wrong with Texas. There's nothing wrong with Texas. There's a lot of lovely people in Texas.
yes,
No,
for sure.
it's a matter of people projecting their worst fears onto others to justify their hatred.
Right.
And so I wanted to leave. France is a country that's known for, fashion, food, and but people don't realize that when you live in France, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of racism, anti-Semitism. There's a lot of homophobia. At least there
Mm.
was when I was a child. And when you're different, you stand out.
Right. It's interesting.
And I don't know how it is in other small town, but I feel like you don't want to be known as the weird kid or the kid that's different or the one that talks different or thinks different.
I'm curious, JP, knowing what I know about you, having read The House of Spirits and then moved here and I know about your educational experiences and so, and also your spiritual gifts. Did that help confirm any of your spiritual gifts? And did that give you some support in the sense that, I mean, you've got a lot going on, JP. You're spiritually gifted, you're extremely intelligent. There's factors regarding society's views of homosexuality at the time, all those sorts of things. Did The House of Spirits, did that book encourage you in any sort of way? I'm just curious.
Well, when I read, first of all, I love Isabella Allende. I love her writing. Everything she's ever written, I've read, I've loved. But I remember at the time reading that book, and everybody's looking at me like, how can you carry such a big book? And it's too big for you, and the words are too big, and you won't understand it. But what they didn't know about me is that I would literally devour books. I would get a book and read it cover to
Mm-hmm.
cover in no time. And sometimes they were really advanced books. They were and what I didn't know, and I spoke well. I was gifted when it came to speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And but when it came to school, I was terrible at school because I was terrified of being in school. So I would go to
Mm-hmm.
school and I was frozen. I didn't do very much. And I remember the teacher saying I was lazy, but I was not lazy. I was terrified. So if you have a kid in your classroom who is very smart but doesn't do anything, chances are somebody is hurting them or something is going on. Because really rarely, really gifted students decide not to do the work. It's because they are if you cannot do good work when you're in an environment where that's hostile. When you're trying to survive, you cannot do good work. And so the children, if you have kids I'm going to answer your question about Isabel Allende. When you're in a classroom and you're a teacher and you have kids, and you have a kid that's super quiet, and he's gifted, you've tested him, and the kid really has really high potential, but
Right.
he's not doing anything. Something is going on in the life of that child. And what's shocked me the most as a child is that I don't think I've ever had a teacher in my elementary school years that took me aside and asked me if I was okay. No, they never came up to me and say, "Hey, you know what? I realize you don't play with other kids. You stand aside. You read your books. You don't want. You're terrified. You don't engage. You don't do this. You don't do that." I mean, there were so many things that were done to me by teachers over the years that were mean, that I was equally afraid of the kids as I was from the teachers.
So
And so,
now, as a parent of a young boy, do you see things being different?
yeah, I feel like my son goes to a school where the teachers are very loving and very compassionate and very caring. And I think we've gone too far into the side of wanting to understand kids where they're at. Sometimes
Mm.
they get to realize that they're dealing with little terrorists, and negotiating with them is not a good deal. You're like, it's is what
True.
it is. So it's kind of like the difference between me and my son is that my son will do something bad. I try to engage him and talk to him about what he's done and trying to reflect on what he's done. And he's already starting to ask me for some privilege when he's just messed up. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. And it's like you don't get something good given to you when you do something bad, right? But as a kid, and I'm gonna come back to House of Spirit. As a kid, I had a wish. I really wanted to have magical powers because I wanted
Uh,
to wish my life away. I wanted to go some places. I didn't want to be there. And so when I read that book, I was like, wow, this is such an incredible book. And characters are like regular people, just they have superpowers or powers out of this world. And I'm pretty intuitive, very intuitive.
right.
And I don't know if my intuition comes from my family, because my family, there's a lot of very intuitive people. But there's also maybe the superpower comes from the fact that if you're always sensing danger and you're always hyper
Mm.
vigilant and you think people are going to come, you start tuning into people and reading people up. I can size people up pretty fast
Right.
from afar,
Right.
just by body language.
Just by body language and having to defend yourself.
Right. So, for example, if I see a group of white dudes with shaved head and swastikas on their arms coming toward me with a knife, I'm saying that as a joke. I don't think cancer patients coming out of a meeting. I'm thinking skinheads. And I'm saying that as a joke, but sometimes people are very clear about who they are and their intent is. And
Right.
because people have good, if you're a good person and you believe in goodness, you're going to try to assume people are going to be at the same level as you. That's why so many people get hurt, because they want to be polite and because they don't follow their instincts. Women don't. Women on a regular basis, for example, don't follow their instinct. They'll be in a parking lot at night and the guy comes toward them and they don't want to be rude. Well, I'd rather be rude than to be raped, right? And so it's when you gotta follow instincts. If it doesn't feel right and if you feel scared, listen to it. And as a child who was beat up pretty much every single day of my life, going to school, I was abused and insulted and called names and persecuted. And well, at one point you start trusting yourself. You start not you don't assume people are nice. You don't assume people
Right.
are going mean well. You assume that, and that's how that connects. You think of a woman who's being beat up by her husband, a kid who's being bullied at school, a person who's at war. All these people have one thing in common: they're trying to survive whatever environment they're in. And I can understand why some children are choosing to try to commit suicide. I hear about children trying to commit suicide because they're driven to the edge, because they'll come home and say to their parents, I'm unhappy, I'm scared, I need to be protected. And the parents will say, no, you need to go to school. That's the law. You got to go
Right.
back to the school. That's your school. And the parents will go to the school and talk to the principal and say, my son or my daughter is being abused. And the principal will say, well, we take this very seriously at our school and we have a no bullying policy. Well, it's kind of like somebody was coming up to the police station and says, well, you know what? My ex-boyfriend wants to kill me. And say, well, you can take a restraining order and we'll enforce it when it comes. And then it's like, well, I'll frame it, put it above my fridge, and then hopefully it will protect me when he comes to kill me, right? So it's something with a kid who says, this one kid wants to beat me up every day of my life. And then the teacher's like, oh, well, I've never seen anything happen, or it must be done, silently. And so what happens was those kids grow up and they snap,
Right.
because they get to a point where they snap. And in America, unfortunately, you've got access to weapons. And so sometimes they snap and they do terrible things. You show me and I'm not justifying it, but you show me somebody who is hateful of everyone, who is wanting to hurt everybody. Chances are they were hurt at some point.
Right.
And luckily, I never had the desire to hurt anyone that way. But I could see how somebody who is the victim of bullying every day of their life would turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to make you pay for it.
Have you found this in your clients at all in working with them? I don't know now what age your clients are. They're a little older, but have you found this to be, because I feel like there's an increase in suicides recently, especially. So not just among, well, definitely among young people, but in general, there's obviously an increase in suicides. But do you feel like, are you seeing this at all in your clientele?
Well, now I don't work with kids as much.
Right.
I have a few teenagers, but I'm trying not to even. I don't have too many teenagers right now. When I worked in school settings, I saw, I witnessed a lot of violence in the community, and whatever happens in the community makes its way into the schools.
Oh.
So the school is kind of like the just pretend that's a giant spider web, and the center of the spider web is schools and the community center, and every ramification goes into homes and into streets. So kids, sometimes going to school, will be threatened, or they
Mm.
will go through streets where people might, you know, shake them for money or sell
Mhm.
drugs, or they'll
Mhm.
know. There was one year I was working at a school, and the very morning we went to the school, there was a dead body in front of the school. Another school I worked at, one kid threw himself into the light rail train.
Let's specify where that was.
It was in Richmond, California. There was a kid. One year, I had the police came to the school, and the mother and father, and I had one kid as a client, and then his brother had jumped in front of a train, and he was a teenager. I mean, stuff like that. It's unfortunate, but stuff like that happened. Like I had a kid shot. One kid cut school, and he went in the wrong area, and he got murdered. He was 13 years old, and to this day, I still think about him, and I remember his mother.
Uh,
And then I had another kid that was 15 that was also murdered. His mother worked at a post office, and I remember seeing her face. The lack of, like it's inconceivable for a parent to lose a child like that. It's
right.
inconceivable to lose a child. Children shouldn't be dying before their parents. So when a child gets murdered, it goes against the very order of things. And teachers love their students. Most of the teachers I've worked with in
Mhm.
California love their kids. That's why they do the work they do. Being a teacher requires you to. It's a very difficult job that requires lots of training, and you get underpaid, and you get vilified every time there's something that goes wrong in the community. The teachers did it, so it's like totally unfair. And but most educators I've ever met, especially I worked in WCCUSD, and I worked for OUSD, and I worked for FUHSD, and I've worked for different school districts in Northern California, and as a
Mhm.
counselor and as a teacher. First as a teacher, then as a counselor. The teachers that I've met, I would say 99% of those teachers really love kids, and they really want to make a difference in the life of the kids. But I will tell you one thing, it's really hard to do a good job as a teacher when you're dealing with poverty, when you're dealing
Mhm.
with immigration issues, health issues, uh, food. The kids are unfed. Maybe the only time they get a really good meal is when they come to school, even though the good meal is school food. It's better
Mhm.
than what they get at home.
Mhm.
Where they experience poverty, to the point where they don't even have electricity. Maybe the electricity has been shut off. I remember this one kid would show up so early in the morning, and one day I said, "Well, why do you come to school so early?" He was, "Well, here there's light. In my house, there's no light right now."
Wow.
The foster care system in America is also not working very well. There's tons of kids are in foster care. We will take children away from their parents because they don't have money, and then place them in foster care, which costs crazy amount of money. Why can't we just take that money and give it to the parents and create some
Right. Help
social
them
welfare,
recreate their lives.
right? Instead of
Right.
taking those children away from their families
Right.
and
I
creating
hear
that
you.
and perpetuating the cycle of poverty and then the cycle of violence, so the kid end up going to jail because if your parents are not in your life and if you don't feel the love, then you're more likely to have trauma. And if you have trauma, you're more likely to dissociate. If you have dissociation, you're more likely to act, to be on the fringe of society. You're more likely to commit crimes. You're more likely to end up in jail. So it's almost like we're perpetuating poverty and racism and all that's tied in. And so as a kid, as when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, I had two loving parents, and yet I
Mhm.
went to school and I was miserable at school. And school was not a safe place for me. It was the opposite of a safe place. And that's still true for a lot of kids.
Right. Exactly. I was going to bring that up. I still think it's unsafe, especially
It,
for kids who are dealing with autism or ADHD or other sorts of issues. It's not,
but
and your kids, you don't understand really what's going on. As adults, it's a little different. You I understand this person is autistic, right? Or maybe I am. But so, it's a little different to navigate the world. But when you don't have a support system for those kinds of things, it's a scary place for a child.
Well, I love the school my kid is at right now. The teachers are
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. I get to meet one teacher I don't like at that school. But I can tell you there have been schools where I've been at where teachers would look at kids and say, that kid's going to end up in jail. Or that kid's a freak. Or that kid comes from a family. And teachers would have, not every teacher I've ever met has been a good teacher. Some of them were terrible human beings. And if you're a terrible human being, you don't make a good teacher. You just happen to go to school, become a teacher, get a credential, you get the job, and then you fake it till you make it. But there's a lot of great people that are teachers, but there's also a lot of people who are despicable human beings who become teachers. And those are generally worse. Like I had a teacher I worked with, and I'm not going to say his name because he knows who he is and he has to deal with his own conscience. But they were kids that were coming from the shelter. They were at the shelter and they were living there with their parents. They were poor. This one kid came from another country. He was recently immigrated to the US.
Hmm.
And he was talking in class in Spanish, because he spoke Spanish. And the teacher confiscated something that belonged to him. And when the time came for him to go get the stuff, the teacher said, well, no, I threw it away in the garbage. I threw it in the garbage. And so the kid came to me and he's explaining to me, because in Spanish, he's telling me, the teacher took my stuff and then he put it in the garbage and he doesn't want to reimburse me. So I have a meeting with the teacher and I said, hey, I just want to, I'm not getting this right. The child is telling me that you've taken property that belonged to him and that you disposed of it in the garbage. And he goes, yes, that's right. And I'm like, you can't do that. And he goes, but I did. And I'm like, but you can't. You're not allowed to do that. You're not
Hmm.
allowed to take something that does not belong to you and trash it. It's not yours to trash it. And so I said, his mother wants him to still talk to you. So the mother came. They were living in a shelter at the time. And I'm ending a meeting and I'm translating word for word what the teacher's saying and I'm translating word for word what the mother's saying to the teacher. In Spanish, I'm being an interpreter, even though I'm a therapist and a counselor at the time. And so the teacher didn't even apologize to the kid, did not apologize to the woman. You could see that woman's eyes welling up with tears. Like she's really upset. Like she's really feeling betrayed and really hurt. Because for her, she comes from a country where people really value teachers and we respect them. And she
Hmm.
can't understand this American man teacher could be so disrespectful. So he left and I looked at the kid and I said, I want to tell you that I am sorry and I will replace the item. I said to him, I will replace the item. It was not even that expensive. I'll replace it for you. And because I felt like he was poor, he had nothing to his name.
Right. It was the one thing that he could cling to.
And he took his property and put it in the trash. And I thought to myself, why would you do that to a child? And the answer is because he could. Because if
Right.
you're
A little
coming
bit
back,
more about your book, A
but
Boy
I'm,
Called
but I'm
JP, and
JP,
what your
yeah,
mission is with that book and how
that's what
you
I'm.
hope it will transform things.
So this is what I'm talking about is the fact that teachers, and that's really where I want to get at with it. When you send a kid to school, and you say, "Don't worry, if things don't go the way you want them to go, the teachers will have your back. The teachers will protect you. You can go to a teacher and tell the teacher." And what people felt, and that's what I write about in my book. I was equally abused by kids as I was by teachers. And so I can give you an example. Like when I was in sixth grade, we went to school 6 days a week. We had school 6 days a week, Wednesday morning and Saturday morning. It was a Saturday morning. The teacher asked us to grab our book where we write the homework we're supposed to be doing, like a planner. So I get up and I go to my bag, and I'm on the floor looking for my book. And this teacher who was like gigantic, was 62, 63, comes from behind me and hits me really hard in my back. And I ended up falling to the ground and crying. And I was 11 at the time. And
Right.
he just kicked me cold in my back. And I was on the floor crying. And to this day, I don't even understand what I did to deserve that. I just did it.
I'm sure nothing. So, what kind of conversations do you hope your book provokes? What do you hope that either among your clients or among communities, how do you hope this evokes conversation at least? Or are you hoping for it to perhaps change policy or
Yeah, we like that.
idea?
Well, first of all, I feel like there's too much of a tolerance for bullshit. It's kind of like we tolerate too many bad things with kids that we shouldn't be tolerating. We're quick to enforce district-wide, nationwide policies to children in telephones and children in sports and children this. But then when it comes to human morals and ethics or whatever, it's kind of like a free for all. And so the what's very overt gets, if you're overtly racist or if you're overtly homophobic or if you're overtly, violent, people are gonna correct that. But the problems is the subtle covert behaviors of some individuals. The subtle, the joke, somebody cracks a joke and everybody laughs and everybody thinks it's okay. Or a teacher teachers sometimes tease kids and are sarcastic with children and they say something that's totally inappropriate and they get away with it. Or the favoritism where always the same kids get chosen and the other kids get left behind. Or teachers who know that some kids are unpopular, well, go to the kids that are most popular and ask them to select teams for sports. And guess what? Those kids who are unpopular are not going to get chosen because you have kids now choosing their best friends to play on their side, or they get chosen last. Or the fact that, there's so many things happening around schools, like poverty. Kids were experiencing other poverty and they go to schools and it's almost like sometimes they will have activities. And in California, it's not the case. In Texas, it is, but where if you want to if you want to do PE, you have to have the certain shorts and a certain T-shirt and certain type of clothing, like it's required, like the uniform for physical education. And in California, some schools will provide that for the kids, but then some kids are so ashamed to having to ask the school to provide them with a uniform because, like shorts and T-shirts, because it's the fact that their parents don't have the money to pay for it. And then some kids will get picked on for being poor. Some kids will get picked on for being fat. We're also a very fat-phobic nation, by the way. Knowing that everybody has
Yes,
a
I'm
little
aware
bit
of
of
that.
we live in a nation where everybody is struggling with something, and then school. I'm gonna give you an example of how you can stand up for kids. I was working at a school, and I went into a classroom, and there was a boy in that classroom. It was a second or third grade classroom, and at the time I was teaching foreign language, and I go in to do my weekly session or whatever, and they're all laughing at this one boy, and I'm like, what's going on? And they go, well, this boy here likes Powerpuff Girls. And they all laughing at him. They all thought, I'm gonna look at them and like, really? You like Powerpuff Girls? They're my favorite as well. I love them. I watch them every night. They are the best. And so the kids are looking at me going like, wow, you like Powerpuff Girls? I'm like, yeah, they're the best. You got a
They
problem
are
with
the
that?
best.
And so at the end of the class, they were like leaving him alone. And then this one kid comes up to me and goes, you watch Powerpuff Girl? I'm like, I don't even know what that is, but yeah, sure, I watch it for them to be quiet because I didn't want them to pick on him, and they were making fun of him, and I could tell that he was very sensitive, and that these other boys, it's a nice way. Oh, this boy is a little bit too sensitive, you know what that means. So he was a bit too sensitive, and he likes girly things, and these other boys were like all bullying him, and they were doing it in front of the teacher. The classroom teacher was there, hearing it, but not understanding it. She was not able to decode what was going on. She was not able to read between the lines that they were
Right.
really, really picking on him. And she
Right.
was there and she was standing there and she was not reading it. I think some teachers sometimes they just don't have enough insight around what's going on. And so the way you stand up for a kid is sometimes to face those kids and say, it's okay to be different. It's okay to like Powerpuff Girls. It's okay to, all that is okay. You have the right to be as different as you want to be. Different is beautiful.
And so do you feel like there's support there for the parents to sort of do the same for kids who feel different or are different? Or is there advice you have for parents who are sort of dealing with these sorts of issues right now, including bullying or, your kid getting hit on the playground because that child displays different tendencies and maybe the other child, maybe that child's ADHD, maybe, I don't know. Do you have any advice to parents about how to deal with things like that?
You're assuming that all parents are loving. Some parents,
I am. Why not?
no,
But
because
but
some parents are the problem. Some parents hate their.
sometimes, but let's just for the sake of conversation, suppose that they're loving parents instead of creating another
Okay,
that's another
all right,
conversation.
all right. So let's say that you have got a group of loving parents that love their child, and the child goes to school, and the parents really love their kids and accept their child the way they are, and the child goes to school and gets picked on. Have you ever gone to a little league game where one kid is really, really not a good player, not
Mm-hmm.
athletic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other parents are getting mad because their child now is going to lose the game because this one kid who has two left feet and two right hands is playing, and the parents is losing their mind, right? And so the real dialogue is around modeling behavior. First of all, you play baseball. You do it for fun. You don't do it because you're going to be in the majors. A bunch of little kids coming together to play. So the parents have to demonstrate acceptance of other people's behavior. They have to not be so competitive. But unfortunately, we live in a competitive nation. And so everything is a matter of life and death. And so the parents sometimes talk to their kids, and they talk to their kids, say, they don't tolerate, like you're in the car and you're driving and somebody cuts you off and you start swearing and like a truck driver, and maybe there aren't polite truck drivers out there, I don't know. But you're like this, you start swearing up and down in front of your kid's gonna look at that behavior and he's gonna reproduce it. So a
Right.
lot of the behavior that's happening at school is something that starts in the home. So some of the parents out there are prejudiced and so forth. So the way you want to get around that is by building community for the parents to
Okay.
come together and starting to know each other. Because if you know other parents and you humanize yourself to them, and your kid gets into trouble with the other kid's child, you're more likely to be able to go to that parent and say, you know what, Tommy here has a problem with your son. Let's figure it out. Let's talk about it. But when people are so dissociated from one another and they don't know each other, then it's easy to objectify and dehumanize somebody and to say, your child is a problem. My child is not a problem. And whether your child is the bully or the kid that's being bullied, children are children. They will learn from the parents, from the adults, and a lot of times they don't learn is because nobody showed them the way.
Right. So your suggestion for parents who are dealing with things where they feel like their child is being treated as an outsider or isn't being supported is for the parents to connect with one another as a community.
Right.
And the kids for that matter, to become a
Well,
family.
I mentioned that the way you can get around bullying is by looking at the culture top down. Schools where you have a lot of bullying is because it's allowed or permitted or tolerated. If there's a zero tolerance for bullying, it's not going to happen as much. And then the idea is not to punish kids and send them to jail or home. The idea is to build community through
Right.
communication and dialogue. Talk about what's right, what's appropriate, and what's not appropriate. And that's a reality.
So let's swing back to your book again. When we finish reading your book, what is the feeling that you hope your audience will walk away from? Walk away
Well,
with?
so if you've been bullied at one point in your life, you're not the only one. If you
True.
bullied somebody, you should feel bad and feel remorseful, not feel ashamed, but feel remorseful for having done that. And maybe if you've bullied somebody and you have contact with them at some point, apologize to them, go back and make amends. You know, there's one of my a very good movie called, when they induce death. They go back. A group of medical students in Chicago.
Flatliners.
They made a remake. The remake is terrible, but they're Flatliners. There we go.
Yes.
And
You're so good.
and there's one of the character who, when he was a kid, was a bully. And then when they flatline, they look at the things that are which is unprocessed, the unprocessed traumas of their life, and then
Right.
they get haunted by it until they can fully process it. And this one kid used to make fun of this little African American girl, and she used to be awful to her. And suddenly he starts having visions of that girl is at home, she's in the street, and they are violent visions where they get hit and all that. And so for him to basically let go of that, he has to go and find the little girl. She's grown into a woman. He goes there and he apologizes to her. And he says, I am so sorry for what I did to you. I am so sorry for the way I treated you. I'm so sorry for the hell that I put you through. And I think if you're an adult who has a background that you know at some point you were a bully and you've hurt people, make amends. Write letters, make phone calls, go knock on the door and tell people that you regret sincerely doing that to them. You don't know how healing those words can be to tell somebody that you've abused on an everyday basis. And also, if you're an adult who tolerates bad behavior, where you think that you can solve a problem with violence, just so you know, your kids are going to watch that, and your children might take that to school and might take that onto the street. You are teaching your children not just by what you're saying, but by what you're doing. And so
Right.
your behavior is very important. The way you talk to people, the way you address people, the way you engage with people is very important.
So what's your advice to kids who might be And it's hard if you're 11, 12, 13, even 14, even if you're in high school, if you're feeling isolated, or you're feeling like you're bullied, or you're feeling like I'm different. I don't know what my different is, but I'm not, I don't know how to navigate this world feeling the way I do.
First of all, I'm going to tell you something. Now kids have tools to even be worse to each other. They have technology. So bullying has taken a life of its own through
Yes, for sure.
internet and media. So first of all, I would tell parents there's a website called Common Sense Media,
Oh,
which you can go there, Common Sense Media, you look it up, and it
okay.
basically gives you ratings on video games, ratings on movies, ratings on applications, also website information. Your children should not be left unchecked on the internet, having access to whatever they want, because you know what? They might hurt someone else, or they might get hurt
Right.
because you know uh, there's tons of
There's
stuff out there they don't need
predators.
to see. Oh yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing is the technology is not all. Your children might learn things they don't need to know before they're ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
So picture a 2-year-old trying to operate a microwave.
Right.
Having the internet when you're 12 or 13, having access to that, it's having way too much technology for the level of maturity. You're not even fully complete as an adult until you're 25. And you're going to have 12, 13-year-olds with their own cell phones and their own website account and their own Snapchat and their own I don't think they go on Facebook anymore because it's so old. But Twitter and which is not like now it's not called Twitter, it's called X because Elon Musk has a big huge ego, and then Instagram and all those websites. And children are in the state of California, for example, I can tell you in the United States, a child who sends a picture of themselves naked, they are considered a peddling child pornography. So if a kid takes a picture of themselves naked and sends it to another kid, the kid that receives it is a user of child pornography, and the kid that sent it is promoting child pornography. And they are both susceptible to be arrested and put in a juvenile hall. And so we don't have enough education around what's appropriate. The parents do that all the time. Grown adults and grown females and grown men will send pictures of themselves naked, and they don't bat an eye, but then the child does it, and they could go to jail because it's child pornography. So I'm going to come back to the bullying and to the way we can be toward each other. Is
Okay.
that through education, talking about things, having conversations, not being afraid of. Parents are so afraid of invading their child's private space that they don't know that their child has an AK-47 under their bed and coke in the drawer of their nightstand. It's kind of like at some point you should know what's going on in the life of your kid. You should know your child. This is not a democracy. You want to create a safe space for your child to feel happy, but you shouldn't be the last one to know that your kid is being bullied. You shouldn't be the last one to know that your child is a bully. You shouldn't be the last one to know that your child is doing drugs or the child is already engaging in sexual activity. You should be the first one to know, and you should have knowledge because you build a relationship with your kid, because you talk to your child, because you
Right.
ask questions. And if your child stops being himself, if one day your child is a very happy-go-lucky kid and the next day is the most miserable human being you've ever met, there's something is going on, something is wrong. And don't just wait for it to pass. It will not pass. If something is going on, things don't ever fix themselves. If something is broken, they don't fix themselves on their own. So you gotta go and you gotta have this conversation. And the thing is, some of the teachers and some of the administrators are totally blind to what's going on in their school. So I'm not sure if I answered your question properly, but
Well, I'm asking what the kids can do for themselves. So
not technically they could turn to adults and ask for help. The
Mhm.
adults are competent, but that's assuming that parents are competent. The other thing that they can do is there are lots of telephone lines where you can call for help.
Right.
Crisis lines. There's a bunch of their text services because kids don't like to sometimes do FaceTime or talk.
Right.
Tell a trusted adult. Find that one person at school that you trust, with somebody who's going to have your back and who's going to care about you, and tell them what's going on. Because all it takes sometimes is telling one person, whether it's the cafeteria lady or the person who's janitor or the person that's a guard at the school or the lady that's a secretary or the teacher. It doesn't matter. Find one adult at the school that you trust and have a conversation with them. Tell them what's going on. 99.9% of the problems that happen at school happen because kids don't talk about it. They're afraid.
So, JP, let's talk just for a second. I know we're sort of running out of time here, but let's talk about how people can buy your book. How can they get in touch with you? Do you have speaking engagements coming up? Do you still take private clients? All those sorts of things.
Okay, so you can buy my book on most platforms that are online. If you don't like Amazon, you gotta go do your homework, but it's on Amazon right now. Um, I don't have any speaking engagement as of now, but I think I might go to different bookstores in the fall. I'm in Portugal right now, so
Right?
I'm kind of working from here. Yes, I still do take clients, and you can find me on Alma, Hello Alma, and
Uh-huh.
I do private pay, like if you want to pay out of pocket, or if you have insurance, and I take most major insurances, and I'm licensed out of Texas and California.
Uh-huh.
And so that if you need a therapist and you have problems, I might be able to help you. I also work with BetterHelp. I do that also, which I'm a contractor for them. And I like that platform because it's affordable and people that don't have insurance sometimes can find a way to
Mm.
get a therapy on a weekly basis without breaking the bank. So therapy can be expensive in the US, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And did I answer all your question or did I
Do
forget
you have a
something?
website? I wasn't sure yet if you had a moment
Yeah,
to do that yet.
I have a profile. So if you go on Facebook and you look up the Wandering Clinician, there's a Facebook page, there's a YouTube channel that has been severely neglected, so much so that the GFCS is gonna come and check my house, say what's wrong with that channel. You don't like it anymore. But no, I
It's the
have
Wandering Clinician, correct?
the Wandering Clinician, and then
Okay.
I've got the on LOM, I have a profile, and on BetterHelp, I have a profile.
Okay. Fabulous.
I can give that to you, and then you can put it into the description of the
Yeah,
channel, and people
we'll
can
do
get a hold
that.
of me. And then I've got my professional phone number, which is 817-449-0272, and then my email address, which is J as in John, P as in Peter, D as in Daniel, O as in Oscar, dot counselor, COUNSELOR, at gmail.com. You send me an email, I will respond.
That's fabulous. And I know you're busy. Yeah, I know you're abroad at the moment in Portugal for the summer, which sounds fabulous. But I know you work consistently with clients online.
Yeah, I
So,
just do online right now. I don't do face to face. I don't. I have an office in my house, but I don't use it. It's all
yeah.
online.
And that's easiest for people, and you can work with international clients as well then. So I'm saying people shouldn't hesitate. And it's
Nobody should. You know what? If you're in the U.S., you have to be residing in California, Texas. If you're outside the U.S., I can do coaching, and it doesn't matter where you are. I will help you.
awesome. Is there anything else you want to mention about the book before we wrap things up? Lexi, did I miss
I just,
anything?
I just wanted to thank JP. Thank you for coming back and sharing your story and everything that's happened, and also sharing your expertise, as a professional, and how giving us an example of how to advocate, for a child. And it's a never ending job, I think, as a parent, but it gives me a lot of hope, because I see in you a little boy who was bullied horribly, and I'm so sorry that happened. A lot of people owe you a huge apology, by the way. Um, you're such an incredible human being, and it's so inspiring to see that, after everything you've been through, what an amazing person you are. So I just have a lot of gratitude for what you shared with
No,
us
I
today.
appreciate your words are really going to my heart. They're really touching. Thank you. And the one thing I want to say about my book, it's not just about being bullied, it's about identity, about
Mm,
belonging, about finding a place where you can call your home, where you can feel like you belong. I think what we forget, sometimes you could be born in the town where your family comes from and have the same nationality as everybody else. And then this one thing makes you different, and suddenly you feel like you don't belong anywhere. And I think that's a terrible feeling for anyone to experience, especially for a kid to feel like they don't belong and that they don't have a place and they don't have a friend.
mm,
Uh, I think our society is becoming more and more isolated. Sometimes you can be surrounded by thousands of people and have no one to talk to.
mhm,
That's why therapy is so important. But I think that we should encourage children to open up their arms and to, you know, be friendly and be tolerant and be loving. And I think that a lot of kids out there are needing so much love, and
mhm,
they're not loved enough. And then the kids that get bullied, they're the victim, right? But the kids who bully a lot of times are also victims.
mhm.
They are
It's
victims of
true.
their environment or where they grew up. And you know that a lot of times those children grew up in an environment where they're like, like wild reeds. Nobody's paying attention to them. And so the only way they can express their feelings is through anger. So they take it on the one child that stands out, who's different, But a lot of time they are themselves the first victims of violence. They are in homes where people abuse them, or they're in environments where they get abused, and then they reproduce what they've been taught. And so I don't think there's one bad child out there, so to speak, but I think that even the child who beats the other kid up needs to be loved and cared for. And I mean, when we reduce children to being one thing, we take away their ability to have a future and to dream and to exist as a child. We should be loving kids. We shouldn't be hating them. We should love them, and we should give them what they need. And I think that's what's so terrible about our society, is that sometimes we look at a child and we can determine they're 10 or 11 years old and we have already decided who they are and where they're going to be and what's going to happen to them. And that's unfortunate. We should be rehabilitating everyone, not discarding them.
Exactly. Yes. Accepting each other's differences.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I agree with Lexi. You shared a lot of vulnerability. It's, sort of lovely for everyone to have a bit of an inspiration to see that you kind of go from this to that.
Well, yeah, and I gotta say, I wish I could have had a childhood that was where I was popular and everybody loved me, and I was special and unique and different and in a good way, where everybody wanted to be me and everybody wanted to be my friend. But that's somebody else's life. That didn't happen to me, and I know that a lot of times I run into adults and they'll be like, "Oh, I was popular in high school. I was popular in middle school," and I'm like, absolutely hated being in school. It was hell. Every minute of it was hell, and so And one thing that I've learned very early on, and that I wish everybody, I really don't care what people think of me, so to speak, in a sense of, if you don't like me because I'm different, or if you don't like me because you don't like my face, or whatever, I'm going to be like, well, you do you, I do me, I don't care.
Exactly.
Where I would say your average human being cares way too much what the neighbor thinks of him. And I don't have that problem. I was beat up so much that I got to a point where I'm like, hey, you don't like me? Fuck you.
Right. So it's a self-acceptance lesson as well. So
sorry for my language, by the way. I don't know if you're gonna have to edit that out of the podcast.
Offended. We're so offended.
We're fine with it. Sometimes you have
it's
to
like,
say
well,
that.
it's the clinical term. It's like, take a long walk off a short pier. It's like,
I understand.
There's no other way. I mean, don't ever apologize for being who you are, and don't ever hate yourself into becoming the person you want to be. You don't hate yourself to be something better. You don't hate who you are to become something better. You don't look in the mirror and hate your body and hope to be skinny, and that when I'm skinny, I'm going to love myself. When I'm blonde, I'm going to love myself. Love yourself now, and then whatever's supposed to happen will happen. But don't put conditions to the love you give yourself, because if you put conditions to the love you give yourself, then you're not going to ever really feel love, and you're never going to get to that place where you can feel happy with yourself.
Well, thank you, JP. Those are wise and beautiful words.